Warner Home Entertainment presents After the Cameras Stop Rolling, The Journey of the Bounty. Some of the crew are here to take us back to when the Bounty was constructed for the 1962 movie Mutiny on the Bounty, starring Marlon Brando and Trevor Howard. Alan Altus, marine manager of Scotia Trawler, is on board along with owner Robert Hansen, who kept Bounty from sinking. And here is Paul Garnett, who served as the shipwright for 7 years. Joining the effort to keep the Bounty sailing is her captain, Robin Walbridge. Arnold Tinter, who worked on her for the 1964 World's Fair at Flushing Meadows, New York, shares his stories. And the renovation would not be complete without Joe Jacomovich, the man in charge of the current restoration at Booth Bay Harbor. The date is April 28, 1789. His Majesty's ship Bounty is the scene of a mutiny that will become one of the most dramatic stories of the sea. Angered by Captain William Bligh's harsh treatment of his men, Master's mate Fletcher Christian leads the crew in a mutiny and seizes control over the ship. After Bligh and 18 loyal seamen are set adrift in a small boat, Christian sails the Bounty to Tahiti and then to Pitcairn Islands, where the famous ship is burned and sunk. Remains of the original Bounty can still be seen today beneath the clear ocean waters off Pitcairn. But now, a new Bounty sails the sea, built expressly for the spectacular Mutiny on the Bounty. This is the first ship ever to be constructed from the keel up for a motion picture. After a worldwide search, the firm of Smith and Ruland was commissioned by the filmmakers to recreate the Bounty. With adze, chisel, and broadaxe, the Lunenburg craftsmen began the exacting job of fashioning ribs for the ship's hull. The keel was laid on March 3rd in the boat shed that would be Bounty's home until her launching. 400,000 board feet of timber, half of it American oak from New Jersey, would have to be worked by hand. The hull would be 118 feet long and 31.5 feet in the beam. She would to displace almost 500 tons, and her masts would reach over 100 feet above the deck. Among other nautical items, 12 tons of screw boats, 14 tons of bar iron, 2.5 tons of spikes, and 1,200 pounds of putty would soon go into the ship.
Well, you know, back when this was built in the 60s, Lunenburg had everything, many shipwrights, and I understand, I wasn't around when it was built, but I understand from the newspaper clippings that they had upwards of 200 men for 8 months building this boat. And of course in those days it was all hand tools too.
The transom and the first of her ribs are soon fitted, and with each passing day, more of the ship's skeleton takes form.
Older people had a lot of skills that don't seem to exist today. People look for the easy way out, and when you're building a ship like this, there aren't many easy ways.
At Byrne & Walter's Marine Blacksmith Shop, where 3 generations of the family have been outfitting sailing vessels, forge and hammer shape the ironwork, an eye bolt to hold the rudder chain, 1.5 inches of steel shaped and forge welded in the time-tested manner.
It was just amazing to tear into this ship when we were doing repair work on it and see the quality of the work that was done in Canada. And don't forget, you're talking about a ship that was made for a motion picture. And a lot of people ask me over the years, well, why did they do that just for a ship made for a movie? And the answer is very simple. The ship was sailing to Tahiti under its own sail power. Now, if anything happened to the ship, or it was built more like a prop and less like a ship, you can imagine what might have happened taking the ship all the way down the East Coast, through the Panama Canal, and across the Pacific.
In the hands of a Lunenburg shipwright, the adze become a precision instrument, and when an experienced eye directs the stroke, 15 pieces of American oak can be shaped into one solid block, soon to form the stem post, the bow of the ship.
And there's an old saying that a ship carpenter can build a house carpenter can't build a ship. Anything you learn with normal woodworking, with a square, a level, a bevel square, anything like that, throw it in the water, you're never going to use it. There's not a straight line in the ship. And every piece that you take out of her is different and a different lesson. I don't care if you've been building ships for years. Every ship has its own story and its own lessons to learn. I can tell you this, that all the years I was with the ship, this ship taught me a lot more than anything I ever gave it.
In their sail loft, two old-timers are fashioning the 10,000 square yards of canvas that will form Bounty's sails. Every foot must be cut and sewn, mostly by hand, a 6-month job. As Charlie Head tells it, he learned his trade when making sails was a promising profession.
Well, I started sail making with my father. That's 50-odd years ago. And at them times, it was all for our fishing schooners, fore and afters. Large mainsails, very large foresails, the other sails according.
And what more beautiful thing can you think of something that's built of a natural timber, a natural growing thing that propels itself across an ocean with wind? There's nothing purer on this earth. And it's pretty amazing to look over the centuries as I have, because I painted so many different kinds of ships from history, and to see how this progression took place, where you got to the point where you get to the clipper ships that carried acres and acres of canvas. It looked like beautiful giant birds floating on the water. And all of it accumulated in that 100 years during the 18th century. That's part of the Bounty story, where the sailing ship reached its apex.
A few tense moments while workmen swarm underneath the ship to drive in the wedges and grease the skids, enabling Bounty to slide down the ways. And then the climax of 6 months' work. Mrs. Fred Ruland christens the ship using a bottle of water especially flown in from Tahiti.
I christen this ship the Bounty.
One push and HMS Bounty slides down the ways.
Because the ship was not only being used as a photographic stage that people would see in the movie, but also would be used as a floating movie studio. Because they didn't have makeup rooms on Tahiti and places where the actors could get ready. A lot of that was done aboard ship. They even fed them aboard ship, because they had many, many days with 18 hours at sea. Now, the biggest difference, of course, is in the size. The ship is about 30 feet longer than the original, and her masts are about 10.5 feet taller at the mainmast truck, and she's about 6 feet wider in the beam. The reasons for that are many, and you always hear it's because she had engines put in her. That is not exactly true and is not the only reason. The main reason is in 1960, when the ship was filmed, the picture was filmed in Ultra Panavision 70, a very, very widescreen format. These cameras were 500 pounds apiece. Cameraman couldn't hold them on his shoulder like they do now. They were also on a big motorized dolly, so they could get tracking shots going up and down the deck of the actors climbing the rigging. On the original Bounty, if they built her to that size, there wasn't enough room between the main hatch and the outer railing for those cameras to even get by. If you look at the two ships side by side, if the original Bounty was here, there really isn't a whole heck of a lot of a difference.
I actually saw it for sale in a local marine paper, a little small 4x4 picture under full sail, tall ship for sale. And I took a look at it and kind of looked at it again, and this was just kind of out of the blue. This was just a fluke. I happened to be in the right place at the right time and was crazy enough to do it, really.
The ship was taking on a lot of water. There is a worm called a Toledo worm that actually eats wood, gets in the wood and bores the wood, leaves wonderful big holes in the boat.
3 days before we were actually planning on moving her, we actually lost power, which was providing power to the pumps that were pumping the 30,000 gallons of water an hour that was leaking. So I got a call on a Friday night at 10 o'clock that the boat was sinking. They had lost power and it was almost sunk. So that was my Friday evening at 10 o'clock, and I had to survive the night for the next morning until Robin, the captain, was able to get on board and actually was able to get some emergency pumps brought on and actually saved her literally from inches from sinking.
I made 2 or 3 trips to Fall River to look at the ship, and she was getting worse and worse till she was leaking so badly that the story was they were thinking of taking her out and sink her. And at that point in time when Bob bought her, he brought her down here to Boothbay in Maine to get repaired. And I came to see her here again. And of course, being a Lunenburger, I was pretty sure we could do a better job. And I went to see Bob shortly after that, and Bob and Margaret, and asked if we could be allowed to do some work on the boat. And they were a little skeptical, but after a little bit of haggling, they agreed that they would bring her back to Lunenburg.
When I first stepped on board, in the decrepit condition that she was in, it was just almost a magical feeling. It was just, it's hard to say exactly what it was. It just, I connected with her. You felt like you're stepping back in history. You could actually feel her, you know, an old girl kind of just sitting there waiting to get back to sea. I mean, it was just an awesome feeling. What did people think when I bought? Well, that's an interesting one. They all thought I was nuts. Many of them still think I'm nuts. But I think we've proven them that we certainly can do it. We've had a tremendous amount of fun. We've met a tremendous amount of wonderful people all over the country. She's been to Chicago and down to Florida, down to the St. Vincent and the Grenadines, to Maine, Nova Scotia. Everywhere we go, people come out of the woodwork to see her.
Once in the Pacific, fair weather and favorable winds carry the vessel along at better than 10 knots. Then, one December day, the island known as the most beautiful in the world looms above the horizon. The Bounty had made the 7,327-mile voyage from Lunenburg to Tahiti in 33 sailing days.
I consider this a very, very lucky ship. You know, she was supposed to be burned in the original movie. It's reported that Marlon Brando said that if you burn the ship, that I won't finish the rest of the movie. And as a result of that, they built this 40-foot model that they burned. So right off the bat, she was lucky because she was only supposed to live for a few months. And I think it's really important that we save the ship. Not only do we save it for the keeping the outer square rig sailing alive, but I think it's also very, very important that we keep it alive for our kids. You know, this is the kind of vessel that was used by Magellan, you know, by Cook. You know, all the explorers used very similar ships to this.
It is a true labor of love. There's no other word for it. It's just, it's a passion, it's a sickness, whatever you want to call it. You have to be involved in something like this. I mean, it's extremely demanding. It requires a ton of money and a lot of people to work on it. And we're fortunate that she does have a good name, and we do have a lot of people that are willing to help. We've had hundreds of volunteers put in countless hours, scraping, sanding, peeling, whatever we have to do to get her sailing.
When I was 18 years old and I was in college looking to have fun, I got a call from somebody at MGM. Family actually did business with MGM back then, and they were looking for people to work on this ship that was coming to New York for the World's Fair. And being the type of young person I was, I thought it would be a hoot. It'd be just a lot of fun to be going out and working on a ship, acting like a pirate. So, of course, I said yes. I mean, how could I say no to something like that? Because the ship was on exhibition, we had a lot of people come on board. And the women weren't always wearing boat shoes, nor were the men. And it was really tough on the decks. We'd have women come on in high heels, which even amazes me to this day. But it required a lot of care to the decks. And we used to do it the old-fashioned way. It was called hollystoning. And we would get down on our hands and knees with these, looked like a brick almost, and wet down a deck and go back and forth and keep the decks pristine.
Now the reason they were called holy stones is the British Navy used to send crews ashore in the dead of night in a boat, and they would send them into the graveyards to steal the headstones from the graves. And that is what was used to be brought aboard the ship, to be broken up by the ship's carpenter into blocks, to be used, and hence you have the name Holystone.
The crew became like a family. Even though we weren't out on the high seas when I worked on it, where everybody's dependent upon everybody else, you really became very, very close. I was only 18 at the time, but I still maintained contact with you, Boyd, as an example. I lost a little bit of contact with some of the other crew members for a period of time, but they were family at the time. And the ship is kind of like the mother.
The ship gave us back more than we ever gave her. Because if you open your eyes, and you open your ears, and you look, and you pay attention, the ship will talk volumes. It's almost like she speaks with every mile of ocean that she ever covered. But Hugh Boyd was the one that made that thing real for us. Because he didn't come along later when things had been changed or other people had owned her. MGM still had her. And here was this gentleman that had literally been in the yard when they were planking up her hull.
More than 300 Nova Scotians applied for a berth on the Bounty. One of the lucky new seamen is young Hugh Boyd.
First few times in the yards were kind of shaky. I found myself holding on pretty tight. But after a few times up, well, it seemed to get a little better, and now we can work up there without too much trouble. Maybe a little different at sea. That'll remain to be seen. I signed on the Bounty mainly to get the adventure. It seems like a wonderful opportunity to get into the South Seas, which must be everybody's dream at one time or another.
So all this was taking place during the ramp-up in Vietnam, and the draft was very, very active. And they kept changing the rules back then. And I recall it was late in the week, and we heard that the rules were going to change where if you were married, you wouldn't have to get drafted. And we had one fellow on the crew that was in danger of getting drafted. I was in college, so I had a deferment at the time. And he had to be married before Monday. And we couldn't find anybody but a Buddhist priest to do the wedding on a 2-day notice. So on a Sunday morning, on the deck, as a matter of fact, on the quarterdeck, probably where I'm standing is where it happened. Right behind the wheel, and we had a Buddhist monk, and we had the crew there to watch him get married.
The ship is a wonderful ship. There's a tremendous amount of people that truly love this boat, and some of the crew that have worked on her, the captain, the people behind the scenes that make her go. You basically become attached to her. You have a passion for her. We've had some close calls. We've had some issues, but that's just part of doing business, and that's part of operating a sailing ship. I mean, my biggest concern is that nobody gets hurt. You know, the ship is repairable in most cases. I just don't want anybody getting hurt. I want everybody that sails on her or spends time on her to have a wonderful experience and truly appreciate what she is.
Besides the life experience of marriage and children and stuff, there are 2 other experiences that I would never have given up. And working on the Bounty, even working on the decks and holystoning them, and working in the rigging and being aloft, it gave me a love of the sea that I carry to this day.
There is nothing greater to be the captain of an 18th century square rigger in the 21st century. The reason is that I have the ability to sail this as we sailed 200 years ago. I can use a sextant to navigate with. We can use lead lines. We can do it exactly the way they did it 200 years ago.
By now, the crew is experienced in the ways of the square-rigged sails, and the maze of ropes and dizzying heights aloft are no longer an awesome mystery. As soon as the ship is out of camera range of the islands, preparation for filming begins. Members of the crew prepare to play their movie roles with Marlon Brando and the other professional actors. The costumes the men wore were as authentically and faithfully reproduced as the ship itself. The shipbuilders had planned well. By installing removable platforms, they made it possible for the camera to film difficult scenes from unusual angles. The heavy 70mm Ultra Panavision camera is secured in position. Assistant cameraman Conrad Hall, son of Bounty author James Norman Hall, holds the viewfinder. The sailors turned actors take positions on the tatrail, and as the director calls for action, climb the rattling, while the camera records another scene for the spectacular film.
Over the years since I've been involved with the ship, the only thing that's really changed is the condition. she wasn't, when I first saw her in the 80s, she definitely wasn't pristine, but she went down drastically after that, and she's now been brought back to whether you could afford to ever bring it back to what it was new is a different thing altogether. How times change with money. I read an article recently in 1961, after she went down to California in 1960 for the movie, and at that point in time they found that two of the planks in the bottom had woodworm in them, which is not unusual. And at that point in time, the owner of Smith & Rulon Shipyard in Lunenburg made a comment that if they had to bring it home and replace the whole bottom, it would cost as much as $15,000. This ship had a new bottom put in it 2-3 years ago, and it cost over $1 million.
When the ship comes in, there's a multitude of things that have to be taken care of. If I hadn't hauled the ship before, what I prefer is what's called a lines drawing. This gives me the shape of the vessel. It's usually to scale, and I can figure out how the blocking has to go for the vessel. Now, this is the second time I haul it, so I used my previous plan that I refined before it was launched, so it was a little bit more accurate. The railway slides down into the water, and we bring the vessel over the railway, float it over, tie it off to the railway, and then the railway slowly moves up. It's not a fast process. Maximum speed is 15 feet per minute. So it's like slow motion. And we start sliding those bilge blocks in that you see along each side of the vessel underneath. And that holds it upright. And then divers will check everything. Because of the hog, we had to put additional blocking in there because it's very hard to determine exactly what the hog is. The diver has to go down and say, well, she's touching up forward, she's touching back aft. In the middle, we got a 5-inch gap. But we have to fill that in because I can't just have the boat sitting on the forward end and the aft end and haul it out. You just can't do it that way. So this gives additional support to the bottom. We haul it up a little bit more. The divers will check everything. And then we just bring it up all the way. And here it is, high and dry. Well, I felt pretty good last time when it didn't sink, so most of the work we had done at that time was done on the bottom, and you could not see the work we did. It was basically all below the waterline. So this time we're going to be able to see the work, so I think I'll have a better appreciation from the point of view that everybody's going to see what we did this time.
You know, our key is to get people on board, to get her out there, to let people come see her. I love taking kids on board. That's probably the most fun.
Here we are, we're lucky enough to be in the 21st century and actually being able to go to a port like here in Booth Bay Harbor and seeing this beautiful vessel, something that's really here. I don't want my grandchildren to be able to have to see sailing ships only in a book.
Perhaps now we have an idea of the magic spell that HMS Bounty has cast over every crew member that has been fortunate enough to serve on her. Her allure and mystery continue on.
I wrote this song when I saw her in Fall River, and it was just a shattering experience for me when I saw her. And I can't write music, I just write and sing to somebody else's music, but it goes something like, she lays at her Fall River dock, her rigging torn apart. And if you love that ship like me, the sight would break your heart. Her yards are down, her hull needs paint, she's listing off to port. It seems like they've abandoned her, a lump comes to my throat.